I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Today we're collecting our ritual items and getting our communion on, honey, as we dive deep into ranking the Chalice dungeon bosses of Bloodborne. The Chalice dungeons are optional areas you can access via the chalices collected from defeating certain bosses in the game. Pop on a ritual, head on in, and explore the various layers to face unique enemies and bosses you won't find in the main game. While many know the Chalice dungeons for their random generation, if you have PS Plus, for those of us offline players, depending on the Chalice used, you'll get a pre-made dungeon layout to explore, designed to give players the chance to face off against all the unique bosses and make it to Queen Yharnam at the end. Some bosses are repeated throughout the dungeon, so I'll be compiling any repeats into one larger entry, and keep in mind I did all these Chalice dungeons on a post-New Game Plus build, so I was a little over-leveled for the first few, as they're designed to be taken on much earlier in the playthrough. Two important notes. One, in the description you can find a community difficulty ranking poll for the Chalice dungeon bosses, so let your voices be heard and let's go rank some of their difficulties for me. Two, if you want to see my original Bloodborne boss rankings, check the other link in the description so you can see my main game hot takes. With all that being said, all 20 Bloodborne Chalice dungeon bosses ranked. Let me know your favourite down below. At number 20, we have the Man-Eater Boar, found in the first layer of the Hintertomb Labyrinth. A basic enemy from the main game, whether it's the variant in the sewers of central Yharnam, the pair in the depths of the Forbidden Woods, or the duo atop Murgo's Loft, they saw fit to bring this enemy back as a boss fight in the Chalice dungeons. While we do get some unique, cool bosses, many of the early Chalice fights end up being rematches against previous bosses or enemies who got upgraded to boss status to fill time, and the Man-Eater Boar is just the weakest of the bunch. No extra moves, no upgrades to the health bar, just my simple Kirkhammer to the stomach and intestines flying everywhere. Bish bash bosh. This fight took 30 seconds, I don't have to spend any longer on it. Looks like bacon is back on the menu. At number 19, we have the Brain Sucker, found in the first layer of the lower Hintertomb Labyrinth and the first layer of the Ys Gravestone. Another enemy that got upgraded to boss, only this time, it's one that at least has an element of danger to it. If you skip the Brain Suckers or you don't have a thrusting weapon, you've got to play very carefully here. The Brain Sucker can paralyze you with its ranged magic, and once up close can grab onto you and suck out the insight from your cranium, all the while doing grab damage. Luckily, both arenas feature a healthy amount of pillars to hide behind, and it's easy to get the Brain Sucker stuck in a specific rhythm where you attack, do damage, hide behind a pillar, wait for him to spam his magic, rinse and repeat. I find it especially funny that a Brain Sucker is the boss of Ys Layer 1, when this is the same Chalice where Brain Suckers are hard-coded to guard the floor levers, meaning you'll have already killed one to even reach the boss. At least in Lower Hintertomb it's a bit of a surprise, and if fought earlier in the game, could prove to be a bit of trouble. But I've been through Upper Cathedral Ward, I've done my time, and I don't need to find any more Brain Suckers. At number 18, we have the Celestial Emissary, found in the Ys Gravestone Layer 2. The first of the reused bosses from the main game, I can't help but find the Celestial Emissary of the Chalice dungeons to be an even greater failure than its main game counterpart. Because while some of the reused bosses are able to expand or edit their fights to be more interesting, the Celestial Emissary goes in the opposite direction. They cut out the entire first phase with the smaller kin, starting you in phase 2 for the whole fight, which means you don't have to worry about crowd control. Your entire focus can shift to dodging pretty simple attacks and wailing on the jelly-like goober until he dies. Without the smaller enemies to crowd you and keep you on your toes, there's nothing to stop you from going full 100% aggression, and this boss isn't prepared for that. They also could have decorated the arena with the flowers from the main game as opposed to a generally flat, bland series of cobbles, but that's just me being nitpicky. It wasn't a great fight in the main game, but at least there was a sense of charm to it. It's a real shame that the Ys Chalice doesn't have a single unique boss encounter, reusing assets from the rest of the game, though at least its Layer 3 boss is much higher on the list. At number 17, we have the Merciless Watchers and Chieftain, found in the Thumerian Labyrinth Layer 2 and the Lower Thumerian Labyrinth Layer 1. These bulky boys are the Chalice Dungeon's mandatory gank fight. In the first labyrinth, you face them in a 3-tiered arena where you can use the stairs and the various elevations to your advantage, while in the lower labyrinth, things get spicier, as you're in a smaller room where only a few pillars separate you from the bosses, forcing you to crowd control and watch where you're backing into. They hit hard, and if you underestimate them, they'll spell your doom, especially with their enlarged health bars. But even then, these are slow, lumbering creatures that you fought multiple times throughout the dungeons, as you'll often find them guarding levers or patrolling ritual treasure rooms. Because of this, I find them to be a bit of a letdown as a boss. Instead of one enemy you've faced a bunch of times, have 3 enemies you've faced a bunch of times. At least with the Shadows of Yharnam in the main game, you don't face them as regular enemies until the very end of your playthrough, whereas with the Merciless Watchers and Chieftain, it feels like you're fighting them every single floor of the dungeon. Nothing special, but when they're in a game with one of my favourite gank fights, the aforementioned Shadows of Yharnam, they were always going to struggle. At number 16, we have the Loran Silverbeast, found in Lower Loran Layer 1. So anyone who's played Bloodborne will recognize the Loran Silverbeasts from the early stages of the Nightmare of Mensis, as well as the Nightmare Frontier, so they're not exactly a particularly memorable enemy in that sense. In the Chalice dungeons, they're only found in the Loran Chalices, which makes complete sense. You'll normally find them defending ritual chambers or other important landmarks, but the boss for me was actually quite fun. The Silverbeasts of the Chalice dungeons tended to die from 1 or 2 hits of my Kirkhammer, which means that pretty much every time I fought them, I never saw them outside of their torch stance, so I was just used to their fire attacks or their fairly easy to dodge claw swipes and grabs. So color me surprised when after 50% in this boss fight, this fucker begins exorcist crawling across the floor, swiping and launching at me with way faster speed than was expected. Because of this, I almost died, actually being caught off guard by the transition, and this only happened because the boss variant was able to withstand my fully charged Kirkhammer. Just for that, I had to give the Silverbeast props, and honestly, I really like the design of this enemy. Far more interesting than a trio of big chonkers like our previous entry. But still, it's bottom of the barrel because it's nothing we haven't already seen in-game. At number 15, we have the Beast-Possessed Soul, found as the Layer 1 boss of the Central Thumerian Labyrinth, and the Ailing Loran Chalice. This creature can be fought in the main game at the bottom of the Healing Church Workshop as a non-respawning enemy that's meant to hint at the Chalice dungeons. And honestly, I adore its design. It's a horrifying goat-like creature, horns sprouting and curled up like some sort of satanic imagery. It's got the power of flames, able to wield fire with its paws, be it a single fireball or a double fireball, alongside a burning leap that allows it to AoE fire in your direction. You've got to play carefully, as the fire is a drastically damaging element in Bloodborne both for you and your opponents. His claw combos are dodgeable with careful precision, but what lands the Beast-Possessed Soul his spot higher than our previous entries, despite his early Chalice appearances, is his grab. If you're nommed by the Beast-Possessed Soul, he'll receive a gnawing grab buff, which boosts his attack power for the rest of the fight. It's reminiscent of the Pursuer's Curse buff in Dark Souls 2, and is a mechanic I wish more boss fights incorporated in modern Souls games. If you play well, you never trigger his powerful state, but one mistake, and you're on the receiving end of a very high damaging fireball or claw swipe. It's enough to take this boss out of the bottom 5, but even then, he's just a Layer 1 fight in both of his appearances, and doesn't have the health or the longevity to compete with our later entries. If he just had more health, he would probably be in my top 10. At number 14, we have the Undead Giant, found as the boss of the first unlockable Chalice, Thumerian Labyrinth, Lower Thumerian Labyrinth Layer 2, and Hintertomb Labyrinth Layer 2. Now, each time you face the Undead Giant, you're going to tackle a different variation, which adds a little bit of replayability to his fights. The first has twin curved blades, which are easy to avoid, and being the first boss of the Chalice dungeons, doesn't have the health to keep up with the rest of the roster. In the Hintertomb Chalice, you'll face a hatchet and cannon-wielding giant, which has a dangerous ranged attack due to said cannon, but ultimately is also easy to avoid. Dodge against his legs, hit hard, and watch the health plummet. Now, the toughest variation, and perhaps the reason the undead giant isn't higher, belongs to the club and hook variant, as every single attack involves the hook connected to a series of chains, which flows around the giant's body, making him incredibly difficult to approach. It can be frustrating because the hitboxes don't always feel the fairest. You can be far away or feel like you dodged an attack and still get flung across the room. While the first two undead giants feel too easy, this one to me felt a little too difficult. The animations look incredibly cool, but the actual fight just doesn't really spark joy, as Marie Kondo would say. There are far more interesting, unique Chalice dungeon bosses that I feel are better melee fights than the undead giant, and I'm at peace with that. At number 13, we have Amygdala, oh Amygdala, the final Layer 3 boss of the Defiled Chalice dungeon. For what it's worth, I absolutely adore the original Amygdala fight in the Nightmare Frontier. I think it's really fun mechanics-wise, and getting to Kirkhammer the head in felt satisfying every time I faced the beast. Here in the Chalice dungeons, Amygdala feels too small for its own good. It can feel crowded in the boss arena if you're not constantly strafing to the left or right. But the big issue with this fight is that it's a Defiled Chalice boss, which means you'll be tackling it with half your usual health. Even with a 50 vigor character, if Amygdala gets you in one of its main 3-hit claw swipes, you'll be dead. You won't have a chance to dodge out of it because of the stagger. It's brutally punishing and requires you to constantly wait for and create your own openings, but then the boss will often go on tangents using unsafe to punish attacks. This is fine in the original fight in the main game, you've got the health to fuck around and find out. Here, one hit will generally be an OKO, restarting all your progress. And once it rips its arms off, you're fucked if you don't hug its crotch and roll towards its tail every time it does a jump. That last enraged state is what caused a lot of Chalice dungeon players true pain. And while once you know the trick, you'll be fine during the fight, the fact that most people will have to look up strategies over figuring out their own methods to win is a genuine shame. Maybe I'm just not a fan of the Defiled Chalice though. At number 12, we have the Blood-Starved Beast, found as the Layer 3 boss of the Hintertomb Labyrinth and the Layer 2 boss of the Ailing Loran Chalice. This boss is pretty much untouched from its main game counterpart, as the same strategies work wonders. Douse your sword with fire paper, have antidotes at the ready, and dodge to the boss's left every time they do an attack. You'll avoid most of the damage, and you'll be able to punish almost every attack that comes your way outside of the poison bursts and the giant leaps. In the Ailing Loran variant of the fight, it's a simple circular arena, no pillars to hide behind like in the main game. It's a gladiator fight to the death, but one that is manageable if you've made it that far. The Hintertomb variant, on the other hand, has a unique arena property that makes the boss tougher by default. Found across the floor are a series of poison pools that, when stepped into, build up your poison meter. So you can't just follow the boss around everywhere, you've got to be careful where you're stepping, lest you get a nice, slow poison sapping away your blood vials the entire fight. It's reminiscent of Mytha, the Baneful Queen of Dark Souls 2, except here the boss can't heal via poison, which is a true blessing. Unluckily for the boss, if you fight it late into the game, you can shred its 4,534 HP pool instantly though. So overall, a solid improvement over the base game via the arena, but it's still skin flaps. At number 11, we have Rom, the Vacuous Spider, boss of the Lower Thumerian Labyrinth, Layer 3. Now, anybody who's seen my original Bloodborne boss rankings know I am not a particular fan of Rom's fight. It's a gank where the minions do most of the heavy lifting until Rom decides to spam Meteor for 10 minutes while you pray you can run in and get enough damage to kill the creature. But I'm pleased to say that this Chalice dungeon variant is a marked improvement over its base game counterpart. Not in terms of moveset, that's all the same, but in terms of the arena, it provides the player with far more to deal with the fight, known as the pillars throughout the room. For the first phase, it allows you to filter Rom's spiders at your own pace, while the Vacuous Spider does nothing in the corner, and with my level I was able to one-shot every spider that attempted to attack me, which felt great. The second and third phases after Rom teleports and gains her magic, the pillars act as a natural defense, because if you're near a pillar when Rom summons her meteor attack, the meteors will spawn right next to the pillar and crash against it, leaving you completely safe from their attacks with the right timing. She's still an absolute pain to get close range due to her AoE outward blast, as well as her meteor rise where the shards of meteor fly up from the floor, but taking out her spiders and ultimately coming out on top is so much more doable when you're not running away from her meteors every 2 seconds. It's refreshing. Ironically, Rom's original arena, which is one of the most beautiful locations in all of Soulsborne, is what was holding her back from being a somewhat bearable boss. Shame we couldn't get the same treatment for the one reborn, am I right? Hey all, sorry to be a bother, but I'm trying to reach 35,000 subscribers by October of 2024. If, after finishing this video, you like what you see, consider parrying that subscribe button to stay up to date on all my future videos. Back to the regularly scheduled programming. At number 10, we have the Keeper of the Old Lords, found as the Layer 2 boss of the Central Thumerian Chalice, as well as the Layer 1 boss of the Defiled Chalice. The Keeper is a boss that's often found throughout the labyrinths as a regular enemy, often flanked by his 2 pups that will eventually evolve into watchdogs. And honestly, he probably shouldn't be this high, because you can argue without his dogs he's at a disadvantage in both of his fights. And while in his first, his low amount of HP means you'll likely fold him and his flame attacks beneath your boot, you can't underestimate his Defiled Chalice variant. Unlike the Amygdala, I actually think the first 2 Defiled Chalice bosses were perfect picks, forcing you to learn a less aggressive style and to really understand the moves of the boss. Keeper of the Old Lords benefits from this, as their flame AoE spreads and slash combos become much more deadly, imprinting into the player. They've got drip galore, which you can purchase from the Insight vendors upon defeating your first Keeper of the Old Lords. The hat, the billowing cloaks, the tattered aesthetic, fashion souls is alive and well. I just think of all the new bosses that appear in the Chalice dungeons, they're the most unassuming yet surprisingly difficult fights. They're just a more humanoid version of the beast-possessed soul, but because they actually have the defiled fight to give the player a challenge, they stick in my mind more even if I think I prefer the beast-possessed soul. I'm just surprised they didn't gank us with at least one of their precious watchdogs in one of their fights though. At number 9, we have the Forgotten Madman and the Madman's Escort, found in Layer 2 of the lower Hintertomb Chalice. A pair of church officials who went insane while exploring the labyrinth. It's our job to put them down before they do the same to us. And before I continue, a little tangent, does anybody else remember when the Forgotten Madman was speculated to be Ludwig back in the early days of Bloodborne lore before the old hunters came out? It was a wild time, everybody. The fight starts with the Forgotten Madman, who wields Ludwig's Holy Blade, as he watched one Bloodborne strategy video and saw that everyone thought that was the meta weapon. In terms of his aggression, I felt he managed to keep up with me pretty well. I'm not well versed in PvP, despite enjoying a good hunter-hunter fight, but I think my Kirkhammer was dealing a good amount of damage despite that. He has access to Augur of Ebrietas and a Call Beyond, but I never saw the latter used in my fight. When the Escort came in though, things got personal, because we all know the feeling of seeing someone else using our chosen weapon. He brought out the Kirkhammer, and I felt the desire to show him just what a true Kirkhammer was. And show them I did. There's nothing more satisfying than proving I'm better with a weapon than the AI, and the Escort ultimately fell to his own blunt-ass blade. I don't think this fight was a particularly tough experience, but NPC fights always give me a degree of trouble, even in titles like Bloodborne, and that tends to light my enjoyment. Might not be everyone's cup of tea, but I honestly wish we had another 1 or 2 of these fights instead of reusing bosses like the Man-Eater Boar. At number 8, we have the Loran Darkbeast, the Layer 3 boss of the lower Loran Chalice. Anyone that knows me knows that I'm a big fan of Darkbeast Paarl, but that I feel he got the raw end of the stick by being too easy to miss, thus making him a late game kill for most players that ruins his difficulty scaling. The Loran Darkbeast feels like a response to this by saying, hey, we get it. Have the same boss fight, except the health and damage are both scaled correctly. and as such there's not really much the Loran Dark Beast needed to do to succeed on today's video. His electrifying attacks and claw swipes are fun to keep up with, and his level of aggression ensures you're always kept on your toes, ducking beneath him to avoid some of the deadlier swipes as you slowly chip at his health. I love his electrified leap where he charges himself up with thunder and jumps across the arena, slamming his fist down with a Gale Force AoE. I don't recall seeing that move much during the main game, but this arena being so vast and large gives the Dark Beast a lot of opportunities to flex his strengths. He's also tougher to stagger. I had a plus 10 Kirk hammer, which would normally wreck Dark Beast Parl immediately, but with the Loran Dark Beast it took until the last 25% of health to consistently get those staggers off. Genuinely just a fabulous fight through and through, but as it's a repeat of a main game boss, I just don't want to rank it in my top 5. At number 7, we have Ebrietas, Daughter of the Cosmos, the Layer 3 boss of the Ys Gravestone Chalice. Now, there's a level of comedy, as in order to reach Ebrietas in the Chalice dungeons, you have to kill Ebrietas at the Altar of Despair in the main game. It's a shame that the Ys Chalice couldn't have another greater, unknowable force to face for its final fight, but Ebrietas is honestly a really solid battle, so who cares. Her combo game is strong with her various tentacles she can whip out in a moment's notice. Unlike some ladies, she's got no problem headbutting the floor and ruining her mug if it means taking down her opponents. Drag Race girlies, take notes. Her Frenzy Spew attack is well balanced and easily dodgeable if you're careful, but perhaps for me, the most enjoyable aspect of Ebrietas is actually her special aura she summons midway through the fight. This was also a part of the main story boss battle, but was much harder to notice due to the darker lighting in the Altar of Despair. Here, amidst the neon blue of the kin, you can see this orb wrap around Ebrietas, and should you attack her while inside its range, you'll slowly begin to lose health. It's a debuff that forces you to strike with purpose as opposed to wildly tanking hits, as you'll lose more health quicker. I also think her arcane projectile attack is easier to dodge in this variation, but maybe that's just me. It felt more fun to handle since I think Ebrietas benefits from having a circular arena that isn't too vast, so she can't just flee and set up camp far away before pelting you with her arcane minigun. I don't know, somehow this fight made me a big fan of Ebrietas, and as the final reused boss in the Chalice dungeons, I think she's getting the praise she justly deserves. At number 6, we have the Bloodletting Beast, fought as the Layer 4 boss of the Lower Thumerian Labyrinth, and the Layer 2 boss of the Thumeru Ihil Chalice. These big boys are some of the most intimidating beasts in the game, with a towering size that hangs above the player, and with the aggression to match. They look similar to the Abhorrent beasts, except instead of being charged with lightning, they're charged with rage. Both appearances of the Bloodletting Beast share the same overall moveset, which is a lot of melee swipes, a terrifying lunge, some stomps if you get too close to the feet, and even a simple fist punch that is so comically fast and petty I have to laugh. It's the second appearance in the final Chalice dungeon, though, that lands the Bloodletting Beast this high on today's list, as upon reaching half health, a gigantic parasite bursts free from the creature's head, extending the boss's range, including its lunge, which fucked me up with one of my attempts. The parasite itself can also build up poison if it bites you, but I didn't experience this myself. I was just too good at dodging to feel that pressure. But, and I wonder who else picked up on this, how similar is this variant of the Bloodletting Beast to Sekiro's Guardian Ape fight? A large bestial creature that attacks with melee swings, swipes, and grabs, only to sprout a supernatural centipede-like entity from a headless opening in the head at the fight's equivalent of Phase 2. The Bloodletting Beast very much feels like a prototype for what eventually ended up in Sekiro, and you know what? I respect it. The Abhorrent Beast is a better version of this fight, but the Bloodletting Beast does enough damage in its appearances and presents enough of a threat that it earns a good spot on today's ranking. At number 5, we have the Thumerian Descendant, the Layer 3 boss of the Central Thumerian Labyrinth, and the Layer 1 boss of the Thumeru Ihil Chalice. Now this is the type of boss fight I was hoping to see more of in the Chalice dungeons. Not against beasts or kin that can't comprehend their actions, but against an actual living being. A breathing person who's got the reflexes and skills to present a challenge to the player. The Descendant is an extremely aggressive boss that has the ability to attack you at close and mid-range, mainly struggling with long-range combat. This is because at close range he's got dangerous scythe combos that can do major damage, while at mid-range he can throw his scythe at you like a boomerang to do damage, which looks incredibly cool and creates a great zoning tool for the boss. At long range, he'll lunge forwards to close the gap, but if the arena isn't very large like in the final Chalice, you're not going to have much room to breathe as he's constantly closing distance. At half health, the scythe splits into two, creating multiple projectiles that the Descendant can use to oppress you, followed by more dangerous combos that hit more times, meaning more damage. Now, I'm sure the Descendant can be parried, but I purposefully chose not to use my parries for this fight just to get a real feel for the moveset, and I can definitely see moments where a well-timed shot can help mitigate his aggression, so you simply have to adapt to the dance. I think this is one of the toughest bosses in the dungeons in terms of difficulty, hot take, I'm sure, but the other 4 bosses on today's list just have a little bit more style to me, a bit more flair, a bit more ooh ah ah je ne sais quoi. At number 4, we have the Watchdog of the Old Lords, found in the Layer 3 Thumerian Labyrinth, and Layer 2 of the Defiled Chalice. What a perfect choice for the first Layer 3 boss you'll face in the Chalice dungeons. A gigantic flame-reefed doggo who is entirely unique to this optional portion of the game. Faced in a gigantic circular arena, you're given all the time and space to get used to the dog's charges, swipes, and flame bites, although in my case our dance ended a little too soon as I took on an early game fight with my end game build. On the plus side, we have the Defiled variant to really test the knowledge of the player. The Watchdog initially feels like an insurmountable obstacle, as if you haven't leveled your health properly, a single charge can spell disaster, but if you're able to survive, then you're in luck. The trick is to always dodge backwards and boop the snoot, as eventually the dog's head will break, allowing for massive damage for a good period of time. And with my Kirkhammer build, once I figured this out, I was on a roll, baby. The challenge is that the dog has a lot of different combo strings, and it can be hard to figure out which are safe to punish, and which will lead to you taking a chunk of bite damage, especially as the fight progresses and you get into Phase 2 and Phase 3, where it starts using way more combos that are very hard to get into. Combined with his ability to send flame waves outwards with his strikes, which can stagger you to your demise, and you've got to learn all the intricacies of this kit to survive. The great thing is, I actually found it really fun. You can get some free hits when it spews out lava for a few seconds too. It just feels like one boss that takes the best advantage of the Defiled Chalice concept, and also feels thematic, as on Layer 1 you slay the Keeper of the Old Lords, who we can assume was this Watchdog's trainer. A little environmental storytelling for one of the most in-depth optional fights in the game. At number 3, we have the Abhorrent Beast, found in Ailing Loran Layer 3 and Lower Loran Layer 2. This is an interesting case, as technically the Abhorrent Beast can be faced during the main game if you antagonize the beggar in the Forbidden Woods. But I didn't do that, and I don't think a lot of players would risk it. So facing the Abhorrent Beast in the Chalice dungeons, in my opinion, is the way to go. More than any other boss in Bloodborne, the Abhorrent Beast has this boxer energy, where all of his power comes from his punches and his slams. Only due to his affinity with lightning, he can harness that crackling energy to bring the pain down on your hunter, alongside cyclones that can blow you back and create devastating AoEs. Due to the nature of his attacks, many of them can be quick-stepped through. The challenge is just remembering how many attacks each combo string has, because I'd often quick-step, do an attack, only to get punished because I forgot about the second or third claw swing that catches me off guard. He's also extremely tanky in both of his appearances, so you'll be in for a long fight regardless of the encounter. In fact, of all the Chalice dungeon bosses, the Abhorrent Beast is the one that I feel got me closest to using all my resources to come out on top. His design, stellar. His attacks, stellar. The way his Phase 2 only serves to buff his previous moveset, creating a fight that teaches you as you play, stellar. He'll close that distance, hit you while you're healing, and give you a run for your money, but ultimately, the fight is also incredibly fair and well balanced. At number 2, we have Yharnam, Thumerian Queen, the goal of the Chalice dungeons, found in the final layer of Thumerian Ihil. While her health isn't particularly threatening, and she's honestly not a hard fight, I really respect the amount of depth that her moveset has, which makes her feel insanely memorable to me compared to other bosses on today's list. Her main abilities involve utilizing blood to her advantage, from blood spheres that she can fire like javelins towards the player, to bloodburst AoEs that you have to dodge back from, to her blood spray, which produces a rapid poison buildup if you're hit by it. I never actually procced the poison effect, I think it's fairly easy to avoid, but I appreciate that she keeps players on their toes. The only aspect of her kit I wasn't prepared for was her paralysis ability, where the baby Murgo will cry from her belly, causing the hunter to be frozen in place. Only I found Yharnam was never fast enough to actually punish this move when I got paralyzed. Very quickly into the fight, she'll break free of her chains, obtaining a dagger moveset, which then becomes a sword moveset upon 50% health loss. She also gains more blood-based moves, like spears rising from the floor, and various blood launch attacks reminiscent of Lady Maria, but less cool. Her biggest challenge comes from her ability to clone herself. She'll transform into 3 different versions that can all attack the player. One hit to a clone will shatter them, and she's ironically very easy to tell apart because, and I can't believe I'm saying this, the real Yharnam is pregnant. I think she just needed more aggression in her moveset. She's too passive, even if her attacks hit hard. But I really respect that she feels nothing like the rest of the roster, even if she ends up being a fairly easy final Chalice boss. But there's one fight that I think is severely underrated, and it's my number 1, so let's get to... At number 1, we have the Pthumerian Elder, found as the Layer 3 boss of the lower Hintertomb Labyrinth. It is actually a criminal offense that this boss isn't used anywhere else in the game, because a buffed up version with a lot more HP would genuinely be my dream fight. The Elder has an incredibly cool moveset concept where he can create all sorts of different weapons out of fire. A fire crossbow that shoots projectiles, a flaming spear combo that can catch players off guard if they're not paying attention. What about a scythe? Or a hook? The amount of weapons this Elder can create is staggering, and it makes him feel like a well-rounded, versatile fighter. I can tell that this is where the inspiration for Morgott from Elden Ring comes from, as he does basically the same thing but with light. He's easily parryable, admittedly, but I feel like if you purposefully choose to face the fight without your gun, his moveset is still so much fun it doesn't matter. He can teleport away when taking too much damage to gain some distance, and his combos are surprisingly strong at delivering damage even for a mid-game fight. He should have been in the final Chalice instead of the Descendant, and I will die on that hill. His ability to wield flames is insane, and I'm convinced I haven't even seen his full moveset. The enraged state is fast, it's frantic, it's explosive, it's hard to predict, and all that Elder needs is a HP buff so the player can do this dance with him for longer. It's easily one of my favorite movesets from any boss, because I'm a sucker for people creating weapons out of elemental energy, though I personally veered towards water and ice over fire myself. I can just feel the potential of the Elder, and if it wasn't for his fight being over so quickly, I could see everyone considering him one of the best fights in the Chalice dungeons. But I've never cared for difficulty, I see the potential, I see the vision, and Pthumerian Elder, you're my number 1. And that's my list. Which Bloodborne Chalice dungeon boss is your favorite? Let me know down below, and remember to go check out the community ranking poll for the Bloodborne Chalice dungeon boss difficulties down below. It's very exciting, I want to see some of you all there, it's gonna be fun. And be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of my future videos whenever they release. My socials are on screen now, feel free to follow where you feel comfortable. I recommend my Twitter, my Blue Sky, or my Discord. My Twitter is where I'm most active, that's where you're gonna get me. A massive shout out to my YouTube channel members, thank you for the support for another month, you guys are amazing, thanks so much. And a massive shout out to my patrons over on Patreon for also supporting me for another month. I will be phasing that out in favor of the YouTube memberships soon. I don't know, my mind is not working right now, I can't do my intro correctly. We're keeping that in. Adios.